Hey there, and welcome to the Hennessy's House with me, your host, Nicole Hennessy. Today, we're joined with Bree Card, author of Dear Overstimulated Parent, and she is a mom of 3 kiddos and has a serious passion for science. So, thank you so much for being with us here today, Bree. Stimulated parent, which I think most of us can relate to, especially in the times we're living in right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book and what it's about?
Yes, absolutely. So I am an introvert and someone who struggles with sensory issues in my regular life, not to mention, kids at your house all day. So this past year, it's been so hard for everyone. And I had to be creative and find some coping mechanisms that would help keep me sane, but also help my kids to have a thriving, healthy environment where they could also stay sane. And so I started finding these little tricks and things that were just helping me. And I started putting them on TikTok. And I was like, I should put all of these together in a format that's easy for people to access. So I wrote that book. And it's very short because I wanted people to be able to read it quickly and it not take up a lot of their time. So I purposely made it, it's like 40 pages.
Oh, that's amazing. Like sit, that's what every mom needs because what mom with a
Yes,
bunch of kids home right now and being overstimulated has time to sit down and read a long book. I wish I did.
exactly.
So I know this book is based a lot to help people that have adult ADHD
Mhm.
and are overstimulated. What are some of the strategies you feel are very helpful in those situations? And maybe some examples, like let's say your child is throwing a giant tantrum and
Sure.
the sound gets to you, right? That's
Mhm.
me like crying. It like I don't
Yeah.
know. I can't explain it. It gets under my skin. It makes me feel very tense.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. The other day, we were in the living room and I realized there was an iPad going and a TV show going, two different conversations, like a kid's toy. And I was like, this is too much at one time. And I knew I couldn't handle it. There would have been a time in my life when I wouldn't have been able to recognize what was happening. I would have just started to get stressed and feel like I was freaking out and not really know why. But now I understand that when there's too much going on, and this is pretty much for anybody, a kid or an adult, if there's too much going on, our bodies, they have a natural response to that, to the stress, the cortisol, the high levels of cortisol. So if there's a lot, like if your kid's throwing a tantrum, um, and you're at home, this is obviously different if you're in public, but if you're at home, what I suggest and what I talk about some in the book is timeouts as a strategy, um, for yourself, not a timeout to punish a tantrum, but a timeout for you to, even just for 2 minutes, to sit in silence in a closet or a bathroom or whatever, and allow your senses to recalibrate and to take a deep breath. Because a lot of times, what I've heard from parents is they'll say, "But if I know my kid is upset, I can't relax." And I totally agree with that. You can't relax if your kid is upset. And that's not what I'm saying you should do. You shouldn't go like try to be zen. The goal here is just to literally bring down the levels, to bring down your heart rate, to bring down your blood pressure, and all of that, because you can't parent calmly when all those things are spiked. You just can't
No,
do it. No one
no.
can. So taking a time out is just practical. It's not for you to enjoy yourself necessarily. It's just for you to be a better version of yourself so that you can both stay sane and you won't traumatize your child by throwing your own adult tantrum in a response to theirs.
No, that's fair. I've heard before that like, this is the part of our brain that
Hmm.
has all that like self-doubt and overthinking. And then this is the
Right,
part of our brain that's like reason, right? So if this is
right.
overactivated, this part of our brain can't send the proper signals to like
Yes,
even us out. So it's taking that time, right, to just
yes.
let this part of your brain come back.
Right, right. Yeah.
What do you do in those moments? Like if you're taking a minute in the closet, like you can't go in the closet and throw stuff and yell and be like, I mean, you can,
Right.
but it's not going to activate this part of your brain. It's going to
Yes.
like it's going to reinforce this part, right? So
Yep.
what do you do in those moments to try
Yeah.
and regulate that?
Usually what I do, well, obviously, the first thing you have to do is make sure your kids are safe. And during pandemic times, I've used so much screen time, for your kids. If you have to use it, it's better than you yelling, right? It's better than you having an explosive moment with your kid. They can watch a TV show for 15 minutes while you take a second. So if you have little kids, put them in a crib with some toys and books. If you have bigger kids, give them a tablet or whatever. And then what I do is I'll go in my bathroom or my bedroom. Sometimes I'll just throw myself face first on the bed and put in headphones and listen to white noise for 2 to 3 minutes, and just take some deep breaths. And it's amazing the change in my perspective, because I can feel so desperate, so overwhelmed in those moments of chaos. But all it takes is bringing my blood pressure down and being alone for a second for me to be like, okay, this is just a blip, on the whole timeline of my parenting. I can make it through this. And it's much easier to talk myself down in a moment like that than it is in a moment where I'm being, touched and asked things of constantly.
Right. And these are the times where I think a lot of us are dealing with that. We're not used to having
Yeah,
everybody home all the time. And so the overstimulation is at an all time high. I mean,
it
I'm
is.
not a very easily overstimulated person. Loud sounds get to me.
Yeah,
But other than that, I can deal with a lot going on at the same time. But
right.
myself is feeling this way right
Yeah,
now, right? And
right. Yeah,
I think breathing is so important, and it's so like it sounds so silly to say, right? Because like it's like just breathe, just breathe. But
right.
there's actual science behind this, right?
Yeah.
And what like my therapist will, if I have an appointment and I've had a bad week or something, and she can tell I'm like running a million miles a minute, she'll
Hmm.
make me do a breathing exercise with her. And it's
Yeah.
like I have to relax my body. I breathe in for 5 seconds, I hold for five, I exhale for five, and she'll make me do
Yes.
that like 2 or 3 times. And then I just feel like,
Yeah.
just
It's
like
amazing. It's
calm.
really amazing.
It's so simple to do, and it really only
Yeah.
takes like 30 seconds to
Yeah.
do that each time, right? So you're right.
Yeah.
It's like 1 to 2 minutes, do it a
Right.
couple times, relax. Yeah.
And it's tempting to feel like, as a parent, and I did this a lot when I was a younger parent, to think like, well, that's silly, like that's not going to make a difference, like what, that's kind of a waste of time. But genuinely, it is not a waste of time. And it seems small, but it has such a big impact on your mental health. And it's so important for you to be a good mom or a good dad. You have to take care of your own mind in order to parent well. And another, what you were talking about, how we're all experiencing that overstimulated feeling during this time. Something that has helped me is thinking about how right now, parenting in a pandemic, I picture it in my mind similarly to running with sandbags. You know how people will do that when they're training? They'll run with sandbags to make it like extra difficult so that when they take them off, they're faster, right? They're stronger. And so I think about how we're parenting in this pandemic. It's so hard, but think about when things return to somewhat of a state of normalcy, it's going to seem easier. It's going to seem, we're going to have all these tools under our belt that we've learned for parenting. We're going to be calmer, we're going to be more patient. And that's huge. That's a benefit that we'll take from this. In spite of all the horrible things, we'll grow so much as a society of parents. And I think that's really valuable.
I think I think that's key. And
Yeah.
I think that what you're saying is like it's what defines how we process this time. Like we can
Hmm.
sit in our day and go, oh, here we go again. And I hate this and it
Right.
sucks. And like it's so easy to do
Hmm.
that, right? It's so easy to think that way. But the moment you start thinking of like what, even though this is hard, what can come out of it, you're
Right.
changing your whole mindset. You're looking at things, even though they suck, like it's
Yeah.
not, this is temporary,
Yeah.
and you're reassuring yourself of that, and you're
Yeah.
reassuring yourself of the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean that applies to anything in life.
It does. Yeah.
Like it can be
So valuable.
everybody I interview, we talk about that, like when people reflect on bad things that they've gone through and they're
Right.
like, well, I could have done this or I should have done that. I'm like, whoa, 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 you're talking as a person with a bigger tool belt.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you're talking now as a person reflecting who has like a box of tools where you had like a hammer
Yeah.
before. And so you couldn't have thought that way. You did the best you
Right.
could in the times
Right.
you were in, right?
Yep.
So yeah,
Exactly.
I definitely will appreciate the little
Yes.
things more when we come out of
Yes.
this. Like,
So true.
yeah, like the school day. I'll appreciate
Yeah.
that. So as a mom or dad, when you're dealing with these kind of issues and feeling overstimulated or just super stressed out, I know that you talk a lot about science and the relation between science and parenting and how it can create an environment where you feel less stressed
Yeah.
by relating the two. Can you elaborate on that a little bit
Yeah.
for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has so much relevance to my life because of the clash between my husband and I when we are parenting. Because I'm much more like, I guess, for lack of a better word, nerdy than he is, right? Like I am much more like book smart, into like reading research papers and that kind of thing. And he's got more street smart and like emotional intelligence. And so there are times when we're parenting and he'll say something like, um, our daughter's just trying to manipulate us. She's just doing this. She just wants her way. And she's just like trying to get us to do this like at bedtime or whatever. She's just asking for this because she doesn't want to go to bed. And I understand the science behind it. And so it's much easier for me to be like, no, take a deep breath. Like, that's really not what's happening. This is normal. What she's doing is a normal response. There is a parenting psychologist that I love. I don't know if you've read any of his work, Dr. Ross Green.
I know the
Um,
name.
he is so amazing. I can't recommend his books highly enough, but he talks a lot about how his whole theory, or I guess it's not really a theory, I just think it's fact, but if kids can do well, they will do well. So if you just think about that in the context of anything, school, chores, if they can do well, they will, because it's to their benefit to succeed. Like, society is already has all these rewards built in for being a successful person. And if they could do it, they would do it. So there's some incompatibility that's holding them back from performing up to expectations. And so it then just becomes a game of like figuring out, well, what is it? What is it about the situation that's causing my child to not meet these expectations? And Ross Green talks about collaborating with your child to figure out what that is and including them in the process, because they're an individual with unique ideas, unique needs, and they know themselves better than you do. So when you work together with your wisdom and experience plus their knowledge of their own identity, then you can come to a solution that's much better than just some kind of like, well, you're going to be we're taking away your tablet for the rest of the week. um like that's just that's you instituting like your own solution just to get the desired result, which, it can work, but it's not as effective as including your child in the process. And so what I've been trying to do is gently like usher my husband into some more knowledge of how science, how, their brains work, and how the psychology works, how the hormones work, and how we can use all that to our advantage and not let it frustrate us as much. Understanding that this is a normal thing. All kids do this. This is biology. To me, it's just comforting. I'm like, okay, my kid's not a psychopath. They're not a narcissist. They're just a child, and we can be creative and solve this together.
That's interesting. Okay, so I'm more like your husband, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
my husband is more like you.
Right.
And I no, but I love that perspective because I feel like we tend when we're emotionally very not in control, but like aware, just very
Yes.
aware emotionally. Like I can see myself being like he's just trying to manipulate me right now.
Right.
And but what I'm doing there is I'm looking at it from an adult's emotional perspective,
Right.
right? And
Right.
little epiphany moments during interviews because
Yes.
they don't have the emotional response of an adult yet, right? They're
Yeah.
learning how to express themselves.
Right.
So me assuming it's manipulation would be what I would expect from an adult, but
Right. Right. Because they
saying
would do that.
something similar, right?
Right.
So what you're saying is from a child's perspective, you have to remind yourself that like that's a different thought process for
Yes.
them.
Yes. Like the way I told my husband, we've been especially struggling with bedtime. I feel like a lot of parents have during the pandemic for whatever reason. It's been extra hard. But my daughter, it's a big ordeal every night, and it takes like 10 times she's getting up and asking for things, and my husband is getting so frustrated. I mean, I am too, but he's like, she just wants to control us. And I have to be like, no, I think what's going on here is she wants to feel safe. She wants to feel safe, and all she knows to do is to be around us in order to feel safe. So we have to figure out a way to provide that feeling of safety, without us, totally giving in to her and letting her be spoiled, but at the same time, figuring out what's going to work and help her feel secure. So yeah, that it can be really difficult. And I don't always know, obviously, what the solutions are. And it's just a constant learning experience.
I agree. I'm dealing with the same exact thing with my 7-year-old son.
Uh-huh.
Like for the last couple weeks, it's like, I mean, it's so hard to even get him to go upstairs to go to bed. And then when he
Yes.
gets in his bed, he's now reading. And the
Right.
reading has turned into, I'm going to read really loud.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then he'll start just making random noises.
Right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
"Ugh, ugh," like just to be annoying, and him and his sister
Yep.
share a room. So for me with my son, I'm trying to figure that out. Like what is going on? But it sounds to me like what you would suggest is like I sit him down to be part of that conversation then like,
Right.
"Hey, I've noticed lately we're having this issue with fighting going to sleep. So
Right.
why do you think that is?" And like having a conversation. I
Yes.
th- I think it's tricky though, because other people would say too, in the field of like pediatrics and
Hmm.
stuff, that children a lot of the times don't know what it is that's bothering them.
So true. Yes.
So
Hmm.
sometimes like we can ask the question, but you can't always expect to you're not going to get an adult
Right.
reaction.
Right.
So it's talking through and then trial and error, right? Like for us,
Yeah.
he was playing Xbox a lot,
Hmm.
close to bedtime. So I've cut that
Okay.
out. And it
Right.
was like an hour before bedtime, there's like, we're done with the
Yeah.
electronics because I think that's been part of the issue.
Right.
Um, and then I think, like maybe we just need to have a conversation about it's okay if you're having trouble sleeping and you want to lay in bed and read because reading's good for
Right.
you. However, you share a room with your sister. So we need to work on our quiet reading.
Yes.
Should we
Yes.
work on that together and make it like a
Right.
fun thing?
Yes. And a great line from Ross Green that I like is, if your kid offers a solution that is like not appropriate, like it's not helping both of you, then you can say, that's a great idea, but we need to find something that works for both of us. And I love using that. I've used it a lot with my kids because they can understand that. They're like, okay, we need to find a compromise. What's something that will work for me and my mom? So I really like that line.
Yeah. And there's a fine line between like compromising,
Hmm.
bribery, and boundaries,
Yes.
right?
So true. Hmm.
So you have to be so careful, I
Yep.
think,
So true.
when dealing with that. It's not like I did another podcast interview with a relationship specialist, and we were talking about how you have to remember it's a relationship, it's not an exchange.
Right.
So
Right.
I feel like this goes in line with that, right? Like you're not
Yeah.
saying I'll do this if you do that.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
saying like we need to figure out what we can both be satisfied with. And there is such a
Right.
like just such a tiny line there
Yep.
in
It's a
between what's what.
balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk staying on the line of parenting in
Hmm.
general. And you're saying how you and your husband are different. I
Hmm.
had a little bit of this conversation with somebody else as well, and I'd love to
Uh-huh.
hear your take on it. When you parent differently,
Right.
right? Or even grandparents or
Hmm.
that are, live close and tend to have a lot of involvement. When
Right.
there's differences in how you do things,
Hmm.
how would you suggest handling a situation like that?
Well, so there's a lot of different answers to this question, but I think one of the biggest things that I've realized with my kids is if my husband and I are disagreeing on a value or like I don't know, like politics or some kind of value or religion or something, um, what is healthy and normal, I think, is to say to my kid, "Hey, your dad and I don't agree on this. I think this way. he thinks this way, and that's fine. You can think whichever, you can choose for yourself what you want to believe. Obviously, this doesn't work for everything, but if it's like a values or like a principle, I think that it's more helpful to just be honest with your child and say, like, people have differing viewpoints, and this is why I believe what I believe, and this is why your dad believes this. And I think that's more helpful than like shutting the other person out or like bad mouthing them or making it a big argument. You know,
Or
people
saying they're
disagree on
wrong.
things. Yeah, or saying they're wrong, right? Now, when it comes to like actual behavior, parenting things, like I've run into issues with my own parents where I've had to say, you know, please don't talk about this with my child. Um, just please respect this boundary. I don't want you to talk about this with them. And, you know, usually they will, even if it's begrudgingly, they'll accommodate that. But if they don't, I mean, you have to have a conversation about like, what kind of boundaries are we going to have here? Because if you can't respect this boundary, then, you know, I don't know how we're going to have a relationship. We have to respect each other's boundaries. So,
And
like,
that's
yeah,
so hard,
yeah,
especially if you get along with your family, right? Like
yes,
it's
right,
probably easy if you don't, if you have a toxic relationship with your
right,
family, but if you like, let's say your husband loves his parents. Like, thank
yeah,
God, I've got to say, just for the record, I have
yeah.
the most amazing mother-in-law in the world.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
let's say I didn't. Let's
Yeah,
say, just hypothetically speaking, because this is very common,
right,
um, that you have a husband who has a very close relationship with his mother,
right.
but his mother and you are very different, and
Mm,
she oversteps in telling, like if she comes to visit and letting your kids do things you wouldn't let them do. I have, when my parents come to visit, my dad will do stuff like he'll wash the dish. This is so stupid that it bothers me, but I'm just going to be real and honest.
sure.
He'll like go sneak and do the dishes, which was at the time my teenage daughter's chore.
Oh,
And I was like, Dad, that's her chore. And he's like, what's the big deal? I'm just helping her out so she doesn't have to do it. And he's right. Like, it's not
right,
going to devalue me as a parent if he does the dishes for three
right.
days when he's visiting. But it really pisses me off in the
Yeah,
moment because
right.
I feel like you're not respecting my parenting,
Yes,
right? I take
yep,
it
mhm.
super personal.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had an issue where my dad was we always go over there for lunch on Sundays, and this was like before the pandemic, and we'd go to church on Sundays and our kids would eat a donut at church. And I mean it was like a highlight of their week. I mean they looked forward to it so much. So we would always let them do that. And I remember we were at my parents' house and my kids were like not eating lunch, which is normal. I mean, this is not just a Sunday thing. I mean, they were like not wanting to eat every meal. I think this is the thing that kids do. And my dad was like, well, you need to stop letting them eat donuts on Sundays. And in front of my kids. And I was like, I'm not going to make them stop eating donuts, Dad, but thank you. And it sounds so dumb, but like it was also an issue. We had to have a big conversation about it.
I think especially in front of the children, because feeling undermined, I think that we have this like natural respect for our parents, and our
Yes.
generation grew up a little differently,
Yes.
right? So there's this like natural respect for your parents. So when they undermine you in front of the children, the kids might even be brushing it off for all we know,
Right.
but we take it to heart,
Yes.
right?
So
Like,
true. Yes.
how dare you imply in any way that I am not a perfect parent in front of
Right.
my children?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Somebody else that I was talking to said that like it's the big thing to remember there is that it's okay for your kids to be exposed to different things, right? Because
Yep.
that helps
Yep.
them form their own identity, so to
It
speak.
does. Yeah.
But there is a safety concern. So like anyone listening understand that like we're not, we're talking about our little examples here of
Right.
things. But
Right.
if you're talking about someone putting, feels like it's okay to take your kid down the street in the back of the truck, and that is a safety concern to you, and you want
Right.
your kid in a car seat and a seatbelt in the car,
Yes.
then that's where you go, well, now you're not taking my child anywhere because you can't respect that boundary. Like, you're
Yeah.
welcome to come over and visit and play if you still want them in your child's life, but they
Right.
don't get to take your kid somewhere else. You're allowed to
Right.
say, I am the parent here, and
Yes.
this is a boundary. And that's not to be manipulative. You're trying to make
Right.
sure that you're being
Your child is
safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So understand those differences is really important.
Yes.
It's, we're not talking about a husband who hits their kids and screams at them and calls them names and letting that go
Right.
because you don't handle them that way. There
Right.
is a concern, right?
For sure. Yeah, that's different. Yeah. Yeah, in our case, I'm talking about like the thing I already said about how if he thinks that they're being manipulative and he'll be like, don't manipulate. And later I can have a conversation with him about that and be like, she doesn't know what that means.
Yeah.
She's 6. But
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I like to go to church. My husband does not go to church.
Right.
And so instead of me getting upset about that and being like, you have to go to church so our kids see that we all go to church, my
Hmm.
kids get to choose. And that's just what
Yeah.
we've decided to do.
That's
Like
great. Yeah.
and sometimes they go with me. I mean, not now because of COVID, obviously,
Right.
but like sometimes they would go with me and sometimes they would prefer to spend the morning with their father. And like
Right.
maybe he would take them on a hike or
Yeah.
do something like family oriented with the children, and I would go to
Right.
church by myself. First of all, I got a break when that
Yes.
happened.
That sounds like a great deal.
And second of all, everybody was happy, right? And
Right.
I think it's okay for me to teach my kids my belief system and my values, and then have my
Yep.
husband also talk about his with them. And maybe they'll be somewhere in
Yeah.
the middle. Maybe they'll be totally like me or him. Like we're
Right.
teaching our kids it's okay to make up your own mind. And when you're married to somebody that you think differently in, I think that the big lesson there is you've taught your kid that people can think differently, but still have respect and love for each other.
Yes, and that is so important. And I think a lot of us from our generation didn't really see that in our parents, and in other couples. And
Yeah.
so we had to grow up and unlearn a lot of things. And my hope is that my kids won't have to unlearn the same things. I know they'll be unlearning their own new problems, but I'm
Right.
hoping that they will, grow up knowing that I don't know everything. I'm not teaching them that I have all the answers or that I'm right about everything. I want them to know these are my opinions. I have done this research, but if you want to believe differently, that's fine. That's your decision. I'm not in your brain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
I think it's important to be humble around our
Yes.
children sometimes,
Yes,
right? Like,
for
hey, I
sure.
made a mistake, or like, hey, I'm sorry I yelled at you about that. You
Yep.
deserved better than that in that moment. I was angry
Hmm.
and stressed out and I took it out on you,
Yes.
or whatever the case is, right? Like,
Hmm.
because we all do
Yep.
it. Like,
Yes.
nobody is expecting anybody to be perfect all the time, right?
Exactly. Right. Yes.
And it's important so they know that that's not expected of them either.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to chat with you about what you think are the hardest for some people to talk about, but most important things for people to talk about with their children. And don't hold
Sure.
back. This is,
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious ones are having to do with body autonomy and sexual health,
okay.
because many of us didn't grow up having frank conversations with our parents about these things because it was just cultural. They just didn't want to talk about it. Whether it was
How are you told?
how was I told? This is what happened. So when I was 9, I remember asking my mom, "What is sex?" And she said, to her credit, I actually think this was a great answer. She said, "It's when a man puts his penis in a woman's vagina." And I said, "Oh." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's all I need to know. That sounds disgusting." And so I didn't ask any follow-up questions. And that was the whole conversation. Like literally that was my entire, so anything else I found out, it was like on my own, I found it out.
Which is,
So
can be scary.
which is very scary, and it shouldn't have to be that way. I shouldn't have felt like I couldn't talk to my parents about it. Um, and I think one of the best pieces of advice I've heard about this topic is, I'm trying to remember what the podcast was. I'll have to send it to you. But there's a great like organization that's like totally devoted to this. But the best piece of advice I've heard is you don't want it to be one conversation. You want it to be several conversations, an ongoing conversation. Like you need to be the expert for your child. You need to be the Google for them because it's not safe for them to go online,
That is
right?
exactly what I tell my kids. I
Yeah,
am
that's
your
great.
Google. That is
Oh, I
the
love that.
exact verbiage I use
That's
with my
amazing.
children.
Yes,
That's so
that's so
funny.
good. That's so good because they don't need to be going on the internet and searching up these things. I mean, who knows what they'll find. So yeah,
You can look stuff up and like think about a way a kid types and like writes,
yes,
like the verbiage that they put in could like welcome,
Scar them for
welcome to
life.
Pornhub.
Exactly.
It's
Yep,
like you have
that's
to be
right.
so careful.
Yes. So I think the best strategy is just to be honest. Obviously, I mean, there is a level of age appropriateness. I remember my psychology professor in college. He said, people ask me all the time, what is the best age to have the sex talk with your kids? And I say, whenever they ask. And I thought that was great. I was 18. I was like, that sounds so smart. But then when my daughter had just turned 3, she found out my friend was pregnant, and she was like, well, how did she get pregnant? And I was like, well, a man has a sperm and a woman has an egg. And when the sperm and egg get together, it makes a baby. And she was like, she goes, how did he get the sperm in her? And I was like, oh shit. Well, I don't know if I can tell you that, because she was 3. And because I knew if
Yeah.
I told her everything at 3, she was going to stay in the grocery store.
Oh
So
yeah.
I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
tell her the specifics at that point. And when the time is right, I'll answer. But it's all about like finding the age appropriate response that is honest,
Yeah.
um that's going to answer their question.
Do you do you in those moments when you don't feel comfortable answering the question, do you say like, that's a really good question. Let me think about how to respond to that and
Yes.
we'll talk about
Mhm.
this later. Yeah,
Yes.
I feel like sometimes because I'm a chatty person,
Mhm.
so I feel like in the moment I can overdo it, right?
Right.
Because I'm just like, oh, they asked a question and I said I would answer it.
Right.
Sometimes you need to take the age into factor. And but
Right.
mine are 7, 9, and 17. So
Right.
the conversations are very different,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And when my oldest was 9 is when we started talking on it. I always highly recommend the book, My Body and Me by the American Girls for
Oh, I
girls,
love
which
that.
they
Yes.
now make a boys version, which
Oh, I
I think
didn't know
is
that.
fantastic. Yeah, I
That's
saw
great.
it at Barnes and Nobles like I don't know, maybe a year ago. So I know it's out and I believe it's
Yeah.
also American Girls because they were right together.
Oh, that's so cool.
But I I like that book because it is so age appropriate from like that 8 to 9-year-old range to start talking
Yes.
about it, but you don't have to read the book in order. You can pick and choose the things
Yes.
that are relevant at the time, and it's a book you keep, you hold
Yep.
on to, and it's like a time to spend together discussing. Some
Yep.
people are so uncomfortable talking about sex
Yeah.
and anything sexual. Now, I would imagine if you are a same sex marriage with two
Mhm.
fathers, or if you're a single father raising your children alone, that this
Yeah.
is probably even more difficult for you,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because not all men, but most men are first of all, your knowledge base of like what happens when a girl goes through
Yes.
puberty isn't going to be that strong. So
Yeah.
I think being the person your kids can talk to is very important. But if there
Yeah.
is things that you cannot talk about
Right.
without making it awkward or uncomfortable, that's when you need to call in a friend, like maybe an
Absolutely.
aunt or a
Yeah.
grandparent or whatever it is, like use your resources because it's not our job as parents to be able to do everything for our children and be the
Right.
best at it. If you know you have a weakness,
Yeah.
admit
Yeah.
that and do it
Yeah.
the right
Absolutely.
way, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you can start the conversations. Let them know that they
Right.
can come to you when they start their period and you'll go buy them
Right.
tampons and that'll be
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
But also parts that you don't understand, like maybe, they have questions about what are cramps and what does it feel like? Like
Mhm.
maybe that's like, let's call your Aunt Jill and see what she has
Yes.
to say about, that's
Yeah.
okay to do. Let them know
Yes.
it also lets them know it's okay to talk to people they trust,
Right. Exactly.
you
Yeah. And that's
know?
so valuable. Yeah. I was gonna say, for anyone who's listening and needs a resource for younger children, um, a great book that has started so many great conversations with my 6-year-old is called "Who Has What," and it's just a book about children's bodies and like who has what. And so it's like it's got great drawings and like lots of different questions and stuff, and it's just prompted a lot of good conversations with my child. So I highly recommend that book.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is sex education, yes, it happens in schools, but it is so incredibly vague, but also it's not like we're just discussing sex. We're talking
Right.
about our body, what's appropriate, what's not
Yes.
appropriate, the changes your body will go through.
Yes.
There is so many pieces of
Yes.
that
And
Uh,
consent, you're always, wanting to
Consent,
teach that.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
I luckily, like, I love our pediatrician so much.
Uh-huh.
And she actually teaches a course for kids about
Uh-huh.
puberty that you can like register to go
Oh,
to.
that's so cool.
But like we just had our doctor's appointment, and this is the first time I've seen a doctor do this. But when she was going to give her an exam, because she's like pre-puberty age, she's
Mhm.
preteen, she said to her, like, I need you to know that like only a doctor or your parent or something is like, and only if you give consent. So then she said, I need consent from you and your parents. So she asked her, are you comfortable with me looking at your body right now and giving you an exam? And she goes, yes, I am. And she goes, now I need to ask your mom, and then asked me, and waited till she got both of our approval before she did
I
anything.
love that. That's
And
great.
I've never seen someone take the extra 10 minutes to explain that and then
Yes.
do it. And I was like, girl, I love
That's
you.
great. That's great.
Like that was such
Yeah,
a great lesson for her.
because teaching consent starts at such a young age. Um, like a great way, something that I've tried to incorporate in parenting my young children. I have a 6-year old, a 4-year old, and a 14-month old. And with the 6-year old and the 4-year old, a lot of times they'll start roughhousing or whatever. And if one of them is saying stop, I always take that opportunity to say, hey, she said stop. When someone asks you to stop, you stop. Or hey, he asked you to stop, so you need to stop. And just making sure I say it all the time so that, if they're 16, 17 years old and they're in a situation and someone says stop or they say stop, they have that expectation of the other person, or I have total control over my body. I have bodily autonomy. I have to be respected. I have to give respect to this person. I want it to be like so much a part of who they are that they don't ever question it.
No, I agree. And it is unfortunate. It's important to teach boys and girls this, for the record,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
we're talking not just because of what typically we see, right? Like a woman being
Right.
sexually assaulted, not the man, or the man doing the sexually assaulting, but like if does men do get sexually assaulted.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's like
Yes.
something that people don't talk out about as much,
That's very true.
but it happens.
Yeah, it
So
does. Yeah.
it is so important to have those conversations with both. And it's funny though, I'll tell you a funny story because it backfires
Uh-huh.
on me because I teach my kids that. So with tickling, for example,
Yes,
right?
right. Yep.
If I tickle my kids and they say stop, stop, I'll stop. And
Yeah.
then they're like, why'd you stop? And I'm like, well, you told it's your body. And you
Mhm.
told me to stop touching your body. So I did.
Yeah.
And I teach them like that way. And my son went through this like year of
Mhm.
every freaking thing. Like if I said you need to eat your dinner or go take a bath or you need to go to bed, he
Uh-huh.
would say, you can't tell me what to do because it's my body and I'm in control of my body.
That does backfire. That's hilarious.
I was like, touche, my son, touche.
Yeah,
And
sounds like an
so,
attorney.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I'm like, well, that's true. It is your body, but I'm trying to help you keep your body healthy and then like have
Mhm.
those conversations, right? But
Yep.
it is interesting, man. If
Mhm.
you take it to an extreme, so will they. Just
Yep,
letting
that's
you know.
right. Yep.
So starting right from the beginning, I think is so important, right? Like it's
Yes.
bath time. I know you did a video on talking about like
Yes.
it's an appropriate like time to bring that up, right? Like
Yes.
I'm washing your arm, I'm washing your
Mhm.
bottom,
Yes.
and so they're getting to know the proper terminology as
Yep.
well
Yep.
for
Like
body
I'll
parts.
never forget I was with my my mother-in-law. We were giving our my daughter a bath when she was like 2 or 3, and we were both in there. And I love my mother-in-law. She's a gem, she's a great grandma, and she's amazing. But, she's of a certain generation, so she's not comfortable saying like the proper words. So she was like, what did she say? Wash the front of your bottom
The
is what
front
she
of
said. And I was like, wash your vagina, Raleigh. I just thought it was so great. And then she was like, oh, what did you say? So,
That is
but
so funny.
yeah, it just goes to show like how people of a certain generation just aren't comfortable.
Um, yeah, I do. I think it is really important. I know my teenager, when she was little, she'll kill me for saying this, but she used to refer to her boobs as bibbles. And like
Great.
I thought it was adorable. So I was
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna let her do that and I hope it
Yeah.
sticks. So when she's
Yes.
a
I hope she
teenager,
always
she
calls them
refers to her breasts as
that.
bibbles.
Yes.
It didn't stick. It
Aw.
didn't, unfortunately.
Yes.
So I do think there's like fun and cuteness in some of it. But
Yes.
it is important that you actually do teach them the right terms, right?
Yes. Yes.
And back to the Google thing, like that being
Yeah.
so important to me is like, I have had this issue with two kids, right? So my 17-year-old, when she was like 9 or 10, and like, hey,
Hmm.
moms and dads of 9 and 10-year-olds, your kids are hearing so much more than you realize, and they are
Yes.
curious. So
Yes.
please, like, this is my second time around here, and like, they will look stuff up. And I
Yeah.
caught both of my 9-year-olds at the time looking up stuff on the internet that they shouldn't be. Now, it was pretty innocent. Like for this
Yeah.
9-year-old, mind you, my 17-year-old is a mom.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so explaining like, hey, your teenage sister is pregnant obviously stimulated a whole lot of
Right. A lot of
questions.
questions. Hmm.
Yeah, and she is super smart, but also kind of keeps to herself. So
Right.
I have to constantly remind her personality that you can talk to me. There's no shame
Yes.
in that, right?
That's good. Yeah.
And so when I caught her, I like had walked upstairs and she had brought the iPad up there, and she really quickly put it down and said, "Hey, mom."
Hmm. Oh.
And I was like, okay, what are you looking at on the iPad? Like
Yeah.
clearly to me, that's always the sign, guys. If your parents throw or if your kids throw down a device when you walk in a room, you need to see what they're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah.
So she was on YouTube, which thankfully is a little more censored than like,
Yeah.
being not just on Google, but
Right.
she was trying to figure things out. How did she
Yeah.
get pregnant? How does this happen? And so instead of getting mad, because it's so easy to
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what are you doing looking this up? Because it freaks you out. And when people get scared, they get angry,
Yes.
right?
Right. Yep.
So instead, it was like, hey, okay, well, I can see that you were looking at stuff that you probably shouldn't be, because if you thought it was okay, you wouldn't have turned the iPad upside down when I came up.
Hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
if you're doing something and you feel like you could get in trouble for it, or we'd
Hmm.
have to talk about it, then hey, you
Yep.
probably shouldn't be doing it. And I understand you're curious. And I asked you if you had
Right.
questions. You told me no. And that's okay because it probably made you uncomfortable. But clearly,
Yeah.
questions have come up for you. So do you want to talk about it now, or do you want to talk about it later? And giving
Yeah.
her, letting her know, like, I'm here, and keeping it super neutral with my face.
That's so important. Yes.
The second you start being like, or like
Yes.
uncomfortable, they get uncomfortable.
Yep. Yep. That's
Right.
hard for me. Yeah. This is kind of related, but I struggled with an eating disorder as a teenager that no one in my family knew about. And so I am highly sensitive to anything to do with that, right? Obviously, because I went through it.
Yeah.
Anything to do with body image or whatever body. So I'm very very proactive on body positivity, language in my home, and that kind of thing. So recently, when my daughter, who's 6, said something about like her belly being too big or something, it really freaked me out because I was like, why is she thinking that? Because I mean, I'm so careful to never talk about like my own body in front of her. And so I'm like, where did she hear something like this? So I relied a lot on my husband in that moment, because, like you're saying, I didn't want to show with my face.
Yeah.
I didn't want to stigmatize the moment. I didn't want to make this a big deal. I want, if it doesn't have to be a big deal, let's just, talk calmly about it. So my husband he's great, and he knew what to say and like how to diffuse the situation. And so that was wonderful, because if it had been just me, I probably would have way overdone it, and like launched into like a speech about body positivity when that's really not what she needed in that moment. And so, yeah, it's knowing your weaknesses and like knowing what triggers you and what makes you emotional is so important.
Yeah, I think so totally. I think that's really fair, because we all have things that we've been through in our past that affect
Yes.
us. And sometimes we have triggers that we're just not ready to
Yeah.
be totally okay with.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it is really important if we can acknowledge that. And if you don't have a spouse and you're a single parent, then it's like
Yeah.
that's when you call in a friend or a
Sure. Yeah.
grandparent, or,
Yep.
and when it's age appropriate, then there's a whole different conversation you could have with her. If you're talking about a
Right.
teenage daughter and
Right.
body positivity, then that's when you get to decide, like, do I want to share my past with them and
Right.
have this
Yes.
raw, open conversation about like what you went through and what that was like for you, because then it
Right.
hits home for them and maybe they'll hear
Right.
it better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But I know that you talk a lot about gentle parenting.
Mm-hmm.
and it meaning less stress for
Mm-hmm.
yourself and for your children. Can you
Right.
talk about that a little bit and what that looks like?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think what's cool, in my experience, is that gentle parenting and science really go hand in hand, because when we understand what's going on, um, we're able to remain calm. If things make sense, then we're not going to be as likely to get upset or emotional, than we would if we like didn't understand the psychology or the reasoning for what's happening. And it allows us to practice more empathy, practice like a calmer tone of voice, um, and an absolutely wonderful resource. I'm sure you've heard of this book. It's called The Whole Brain Child.
Oh
It's
yeah,
by,
I have it.
yeah, yes, it's so good. Dan Siegel, I think, is the author, but um, it really just delves into the science of the child's brain and the differences between their brain and our brains, and understanding just how it works, why they have tantrums, why they react this way to certain things, and how, and understanding that gives me such a better perspective on how to respond gently, because the last thing they need is for me to add to the upheaval that they're already experiencing. Because I mean, if you think about like all the changes that a child is going through constantly, I mean, we're done growing, but our kids are constantly growing. Their
Right.
bodies are, burning so many calories growing every day, and their hormones are changing, they're losing teeth, they're having growing pains, their emotions, they're learning new things. I recently was reading about how at age 6, kids undergo a big shift emotionally from, because before that, it's all they're learning, it's really ego centered, right? They're in a world that revolves around them, and they're just learning about themselves and like their place in the world. But then at 6, they undergo this change where they're like, wow, there's all these other people, they might not always like me, and other people have their own lives going on, and it can be jarring, obviously, for a child. And so at age 6, you can see a big change in the way they react to things, or maybe they're more volatile, or they react differently than they would have. And so understanding that, like, that's going on, that's clearly happening right now with my 6-year old. And now that I know that, it helps me to guide her through that, rather than just being like, what's wrong with her? Like, why is she being so crazy? Like, it helps me to understand this is a change she's going through. Maybe she needs a break. Maybe she needs a walk outside. Maybe she needs a hug. Maybe she needs a bath. What can I do to facilitate her comfort and her security, so that she can continue doing her job at the moment, which is growing?
You know, what I'm hearing from you with that
Mm-hmm.
is take a minute as a parent, and when you're going through a phase with your child and they're really struggling, instead of trying to Google the answers
Mm-hmm.
to how to discipline or how to correct the behavior, spend a
Mm-hmm.
little time first researching what's going on with your child at that
Exactly. Yes.
age.
Yes.
Because and that's something I think we don't do
Right. Yeah.
it
It's not
normally.
normal.
That's not the
Yeah.
normal thing to do. Like, and not even
Right.
for me. Like, if my kid's having like not going to sleep, I'm gonna look up how to get your kid to go to bed without a fight. Like,
Right.
I'm not gonna
Exactly.
look at what are the causes, what are the
Yes.
reasons for this age range of development.
Yep.
Because then how much easier is it to be patient with anyone in our lives when
Yes.
we understand where they're coming from? And that's so much easier in an adult relationship because that we
Right.
communicate that,
Yes.
right?
And we can relate to them better too.
Yeah, so it's like
Hmm.
I'm going through like, "I'm sorry I haven't been calling you for the last couple weeks. I've been going through a lot and this is happening in my
Hmm.
life." And we're like, "Okay, I get that," right?
Yeah.
But when it's a kid and they're like, "Stop talking for a couple days or whatever," and you're like, "Why aren't you talking to me?" And you're trying to like
Yeah.
Google the answers, but you can't get in your kid's brain from Google, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Yeah. And from our perspective, it can be easy to be like, your life is so easy. Like, I do everything for you. You have so much. You should be grateful. Like, why are you acting like this? And that's a normal, that's normal for us to feel that way, but also it's not always accurate. There are a lot of times all these underlying causes, and what you just said, that was about like finding out the cause instead of the symptom, like addressing the root cause instead of the behavior. That's what Ross Greene's whole book is about. it's called, what's his book called? He has one called The Explosive Child, and then the other one's called Raising Human Beings. And that's really like his thesis, is that it's really not helpful to address behaviors without addressing the root cause of the behaviors. Like, it doesn't really matter in the long run if you fix a behavior if they still have this underlying issue that has never been addressed.
I mean, I guess you look at it this way as an adult, if you're going through depression or having anxiety, you're probably going to end up seeking a doctor's help, right? And you're
Yeah, right.
probably going to see a therapist, and a therapist is going to give you strategies on what to do when you're having anxiety and when you're in a
Yes.
depressive state, but they're also going to try to help you work through the underlying thing that's causing it for you.
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah.
we're just saying do the same for our children
Yeah,
that
right.
you would do for yourself.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because they're
Who would
human,
have
they're
thought?
individuals. I know, right? Sounds
And
so
it
simple.
is it does it's so freaking funny. There's so in so many interviews, it's like we say the
Hmm.
simplest things that like I mean, and I'm not acting like I knew that. I didn't think about that. I never like I,
Right.
I
I
don't
didn't either. Yeah.
yeah. This
Hmm.
isn't like if you didn't know this already, you're stupid because it's this
Right.
simple. It's like
Yeah.
if you didn't know this already, you're in the same book as most of us as parents. And
Yep. Yep.
like it's just a different
Parenting.
perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Parenting isn't as intuitive as you would think it would be. There's so much that we have to learn, that you really, I mean, you kind of wish that you see animals parent their young and they know how to do it. And I'm like, well, why is it so hard? But I mean, it's just a skill like anything else. You have to practice.
Yeah. I mean, and
Mhm.
that's I joked about that in one of my other interviews about how like when my oldest goes, "Well, you didn't do or you did this with me and you don't do this with Sophie and Mark." And I'm like, "Yeah, cuz you're my firstborn. Like I made
Right.
mistakes and I learned. Like
Yes,
not doing that
exactly.
again." It's
Right.
like that's just part we grow
Yep.
as people and there's nothing wrong with admitting that. Like
Exactly.
thriving to always be a better version of yourself and to
Yes.
do better in every aspect, like personal aspects, parenting aspects, relationship aspects, like
Yes.
career, whatever. As long as you're trying to better yourself, you never have to apologize for that
Right.
change,
Right. Yes, exactly.
you know? And you got to
Hmm.
let go of the guilt of not always knowing to do better.
Yes. Yeah,
That's a
you have to
hard
be
thing.
gentle with yourself. Yeah. It
Yeah.
is hard.
But we're all learning.
We can beat ourselves up for mistakes that we make, but at the end of the day, we are going to make mistakes. That's inevitable. Like, they are going to happen. Trauma is going to happen to our kids. I mean, it happens to everyone. Um, and so rather than feeling guilty, which is not helpful, we have to realize that how we respond in those moments is critical, because what we're doing is we're modeling for our children, this is how you handle a crisis. Like, this is what you do in a crisis. When you have them as an adult, you need to do this, instead of just, spiraling into despair because you made a mistake, and you're like, I can't believe I'm a horrible parent. That's really not helpful. What we have to do instead is just do manage the chaos and the trauma the
Yeah.
best that we can, and help equip our children to do that, and the same thing for themselves in the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the biggest part of parenting. I think that we forget is they mirror us a lot. So the
Yes.
way we respond to things, the way we handle situations, we're going to see in them. I mean, all the time I'll see like my 9-year-old now start doing things that I would do when I'm not at my best. And I'm
Right.
like, ooh, like out of everything you could copy of me,
Yep.
that was the personality trait we went
Yes.
with. Okay, cool. I need to be better about that one. You know,
Right. Yep. Yep.
it's a tough one.
It
I
is.
wanted to go like rewind just for a minute because I
Hmm.
asked you another question, but when we were talking about the taboo topics with children, we talked about sex.
Yes.
But was there other topics that you feel are very
Oh,
taboo or
yeah.
uncomfortable to
Yeah.
talk about?
Well, the other one is related, and we kind of talked about it, but just preparing your children with the tools they need if, God forbid, they ever encounter a situation where they could be a victim of abuse. Just giving them the proper tools to handle that. Like, just a small, like, there's lots of resources for how to do this effectively. But one thing that I do is, like we talked about in the bath, when they're like 2 or 3, I start I think when my daughter was 2, I started saying, as I was watching her, "Hey, no one's allowed to touch you here." accept yourself, or if we're giving you a bath or whatever, whatever your rules are. And I just started saying that, not in a weird way, just like, and not to make her afraid, just so she knows, like, hey, this is just a fact. Like, no one's allowed to touch you here. And that's that. And then as they get a little older, just throwing in some other tools, like I'll say to them, no one's allowed to touch you here. And if anyone tries to, you scream. You just scream no, because they're not allowed to do that. And you're allowed to scream. So, and then teaching them about like what to do if something happens. You come tell me, even if someone tells you not to tell someone. We don't keep those secrets. You come tell me right away. Just equipping them with these tools so that if something ever happens, they're not afraid of telling you the truth. Yeah.
I think that is super important because it's such an uncomfortable conversation to have. And also you
Yeah.
feel like you're exposing your children to
I
something
know.
that's so
Horrible.
bad,
Yeah.
but also like maybe they don't have to be exposed to, because maybe my kid won't be a sexual assault a victim, right?
Hmm.
And like I don't need to do that. But like I'm a survivor myself,
Mm.
and I did not tell my parents at all. I
Wow.
told no one
Yeah.
until I was an adult, and it was
Wow.
multiple times, multiple situations.
Wow.
And I didn't tell my parents because, one, I thought I was going to get in trouble because I was somewhere I wasn't supposed
Mm.
to be.
Mm.
Two, I thought I would affect my parents' relationship, not with each other. They were divorced,
Yeah.
but they were in new relationships. And like,
Yeah.
it was, one of them was like a situation that was like within the family, which is common. So
Yeah.
in those circumstances, it was like if I said something, I could be affecting their marriage, and like I don't want to do that. So I'll just hold it in. And
Yeah.
people deal with sexual assault differently, right? Like we all kind of
Yeah.
internally deal with things our own way.
Right.
And it's so important though. I want my children to know, and I know, listen, my parents are awesome. Like I
Yeah.
know that I could have told my parents,
Right.
because
Yeah.
now I'm an adult and I know they would never ever have been upset with me.
Sure.
They would
Yeah.
have protected me. But as a child, and the way I was
Right.
thinking at that time, I didn't tell them. And
Right.
I don't ever want my kids to
Yeah.
feel like they can't. And sexual assault happens so much more often than
Yeah.
people even realize. I know
It's so
that we
true.
live in a time of like the Me Too movement, and
Yeah.
you're hearing more people speak out, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But there are, for every person that speaks out, there's probably what, 20 to 30 that don't.
Yep. Exactly.
And I just think it's so important to have those awkward, uncomfortable conversations
It
with your kids.
is.
And you don't have to be incredibly detailed and be
No.
like,
Yeah.
it's just a matter of like, no one has a right to touch your body. And if anybody ever does without your permission and you feel stuck in that situation, you need to know that you didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
And you
just
don't.
making sure they know that ahead of time,
Right.
right?
Right. When you have these conversations with your kid, uh, I think probably the most important thing is how you present it. It doesn't have to be an emotional, scary conversation. Like, I'm not talking about saying, hey, there's this horrible thing that can happen when strangers molest children, and it's very scary. Like, all I'm saying is we just need to say, hey, uh, you are in charge of your body and no one else can touch you. And if anyone ever tries to, this is what you do. And just be very matter of fact about it. Like, this is just a fact of life. And it doesn't have to be terrifying or weird. It's all about they're taking their cues from us. So if we frame it in a way that is empowering rather than terrifying, that I think makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is about approach. So that goes back to like
Hmm.
facial expressions and our tone
Yes.
and
Yes.
all those things, right? We're
Yes.
just reminding them
Exactly.
that they're safe and this is okay,
Right.
not, going
Yes.
crazy about it at the same time.
Right. Right.
Are there any other topics that you feel are conversations that you should have with your children that are a little harder to have?
Yeah. I and this is all about like understanding your child and when they're ready to have these conversations, because I think it's probably different for every kid. But a big one is race, talking about race equality and talking about gender equality. Those are conversations that I've already started having with both my 4 and 6 year old, but obviously in simple age appropriate ways.
Right.
Um, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like for race, um, so this was actually crazy, but my daughter was in the hospital with a tonsillectomy, during the George Floyd, like that day. And so the news was on, and we normally don't watch the news, but it was on in the hospital room, and she saw the video. Uh, Before I could even realize what was happening, she saw the video of George Floyd, and she was only 5 at the time, so that was pretty young to witness that. And I was like, oh, geez, like how do I handle this? So we talked about it. I mean, I probably wouldn't have had that conversation with her so early if she hadn't seen the video. But since she did, I was like, well, yeah, there's an issue going on in the country where people of color aren't treated the same way as white people, and that's not okay. And here's what we're trying to do to change that. And so we had that whole conversation, and she knew we went to a Black Lives Matter march. She knew what we were doing. So that's one conversation I think is important to have. Obviously, you don't have to like be that extreme when they're
Yeah.
that small, but you
No,
can.
I
Yeah.
think that, I mean, like it could be anything. So, like my kids, we talk to them about the real story of Thanksgiving and
Yes.
about the how Native American people have been treated. And like when
Yes.
we talk about celebrating Thanksgiving, we've made our own tradition separately. And like we
Love
have
that.
those conversations about it. And with race, it's like, I mean, my kids were not exposed to the news that day, but
Yeah.
they did. I mean, I live in the DC suburbs. So
Okay.
the Black Lives Matter marches that happened here, right, in DC around
Right.
that time, and then the mayor like wrote Black Lives Matter on the street, right? They like and they
Okay. Yeah.
renamed the
Yep.
street. That was in front of my
Yes.
husband's old restaurant. And like
Wow.
it was that
Okay.
street. So like it was definitely like all over here. So it opened up a lot of conversations. And
Yes.
it was simple. It was like, what is this about? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it's same kind of approach as you is like Black
Yes.
people aren't being treated the same way as white people are
Hmm.
being treated. And here's what's happening, and here's what happened in like
Yep.
a minor form, right? Like,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
mean,
And there.
unfortunately, some people don't have the ability to filter things for their children because they're living in it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I definitely didn't filter with like my 7-year-old, for example. But then their responses are
Yeah.
like, "Well, that's stupid. That's not fair. What does it matter what color
Yeah.
your skin is?"
Yes.
We teach in my house. I know that you've talked about this, but like
Hmm.
I have an issue with the saying, "I don't see color."
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I
Yeah. I hate
That
that.
really bothers me. Now I I would like to get other people's perspective on this, but really I would like to get other
Hmm.
people of color's perspective on this, right?
Yes.
Um, any any group that deals with racism, I would like to hear how they feel about that. But to me, I feel like most of the time, like let's say Native Americans, let's say like Black culture, they are typically very proud of their culture and their heritage,
Yes. Right.
and as they should
Right.
be, as just like I'm proud of
Yeah.
my culture and heritage. Like it's fine to be
Hmm.
proud of the person you
Hmm.
are, right? And to
Yeah.
say that you can't identify that is like
Yeah.
saying that it's okay to identify it, but also be respectful of it, right? It doesn't mean you're
Exactly.
hateful
Right.
because you notice somebody is
Right.
color, and
Right.
it's such a lie. Like it's just a flat
I
out
know.
lie. Like nobody doesn't
Right.
see. I mean, yeah, there are people that are colorblind. Don't get me wrong, but that's not what we're talking about
Right.
here, right?
Right. Right.
So it's a flat out lie.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching kids about, like, I mean, we have culture celebrations at schools for a flippin' reason.
Yeah.
Kids are just so much more naturally accepting.
Yes.
So I think that it's so important, especially if you live in an area where there isn't a lot of diversity, to have those
Right.
conversations.
Right. Well, and the truth is, your kids are going to notice color. I mean, it's natural. When you're a child, you're fixated on what's different about this person and what's the same. That's just how we're wired. We're trying to figure out how to relate to other people. We're noticing all of those things. So when people say racism is taught, that's true. Racism is taught, but you also have to teach anti-racism, because what I've seen, this is so crazy, but like even still today in 2021, my child will go to school with like good people and come home with a racial stereotype that I have no idea where she picked it up. And I'm like, this is crazy. And so
Yeah.
my point is, we have to be proactive to teach our kids what it looks like to be an ally and to be anti-racist, because if we don't, they're going to get these wrong ideas from other people. I mean, it's so subtle, it probably no one even said to her, this is what Black people are like, but she just picked up on something like an
Yeah.
attitude from another kid or an adult or something, and she internalized that and told me about it. And so we have to be proactive, otherwise someone else will. Someone else is going to tell our kids how to be racist if we don't teach them how not to be racist. And that's why I keep making those videos on my TikTok. I mean, I don't know what side of TikTok my videos are getting to, but I keep getting these comments from people that are like, it's racist for you to point out color to your children. And I'm like, you are totally missing the point. Like, that is not the point. But anyway,
People will find something to judge with
they will.
everything. So that's, unfortunately, that's internet
So
trolls at
true.
their finest. Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah. But no, but I agree with you. I think pointing out what the real world is, and
Yes.
diversity, and discussing about how different cultures all have these amazing, cool things, and like
Yeah.
they should be celebrated and appreciated,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know?
like I'll say like, look, that little girl is white and that little girl is brown. Isn't it beautiful how we're all so different? Like, purposefully saying like, hey, look how beautiful we all are.
Yeah.
Like, I love her hair, or I love her eyes, and just celebrating the differences instead of ignoring them and like making it something that's like shameful to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that, yeah, I do. I agree with you. I think that that's fantastic. And like children, there's so many good children books nowadays. Anything else that you feel like you wanted to say that we haven't gotten
Oh,
to?
yeah. I was just going to say, I am working on a project with my brother. So I'm from a family of musicians, and that's my brother's job. He's a musician. And so I'm working with him on a children's song, um, along the lines of like the Daniel Tiger songs, like the kind of thing, for helping with specific issues that kids have. And this one is like kind of pandemic related. So I'm getting ready to write that and produce it with him so we can put it on my TikTok and just share it with parents as a resource. And hopefully we'll do other ones too. So that I've been working on that, and that'll come up soon. And then also you can find my book on Amazon, Kindle or paperback.
Yeah, and I'm going to link it in the description so
Oh,
people can
awesome.
easily find it. And if you happen to finish the song
Okay. Yeah.
before this episode goes out, I can always link that
Okay,
somehow as well.
awesome. Okay, great. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you so much for being a guest today. It was awesome getting to know you better and having these fun conversations with you. And I hopefully people can walk away learning a little bit. I know I did.
Yes. Oh, good. Thank you. Likewise. It was so great to talk to you.
Thank you.